Hello, I'm here today with Keith Bevans, Bain's Global Head of Consultant Recruiting. Today we're going to talk more about what Bain looks for, specifically during the interview process. Keith, good to see you again.
Hello, Martin.
So Keith, Bain looks for three things when hiring for its consulting teams. In addition to good test scores and academic references, the themes include problem solving, teamwork, and fit with clients. Is this still the case? And could you explain more about at what stage in the recruiting process you're able to judge these things?
Well, it's certainly still the case, Martin, but what we find is that we actually start building relationships with recruits much earlier in the process. A lot of times we're even meeting students before they get to campus through programs like Connect with Bain, and those programs give them a chance to get to know us and the types of problems we solve and the types of people that we hire. It also gives us a chance to understand what motivates them and what might make them a great fit to come work at Bain & Company.
So let's look at those three themes in detail. First of all, problem solving. Could you talk a little bit more about that, please?
That's a good question, Martin. As it relates to problem solving, there's four things that we look at as subcomponents of problem solving. First is framing the analysis. And what I'm looking for there is, can recruits actually demonstrate an ability to frame the entire question that was asked to them? Do they understand the facts that were presented? Do they understand the situation and the complication that the client is facing that had them call Bain in the first place? And then, do they understand what it is they're trying to answer? What are the two or three questions that are most important? The second thing that we look for is their ability to drive the discussion. And what I'm looking for there is, once they've established the initial framing, can they lay out the options that they're going to try and prove or disprove as they go forward throughout the case interview? As they're doing that, we're going to test the third thing that I look for, and that's their quantitative capability, their quantitative skills. And it's not that they're going to be doing calculus in the interview, they're not going to be calculating NPVs in the interview. Instead, what they're going to be doing is some basic math to try and understand how big the market is, what the prospects look like for the company, and that math will help inform the recommendation, which is the fourth thing, business judgment. And what I'm looking for there is, at the end of the analysis, at the end of the conversation, can they make a recommendation that shows the business judgment they need to be successful at Bain?
Great. So in the context of a case interview, can you give me a specific example of a case that I might be challenged to answer?
Sure, why don't we just play around with one here. Let's take, for example, a restaurant holding company that has $100 million they're looking to invest in making a couple of acquisitions to grow out their portfolio. Let's assume for today's discussion that those targets that they're looking at, there's two targets. They're both growing concepts. They both appear to be very successful. They're both in my hometown of Chicago. And I have two questions for you. One, how would you evaluate the targets that we're considering? And two, would you make an acquisition with the money that you have to invest?
Let's pretend then. So we're now in an interview scenario. I come in. Do you give me, how does this work? Do you give me slides? Do you give me something with your data on it? I mean, how do I then begin to answer that question?
Yeah, that's a great question. What will happen in the interview a lot of times is we will come in with a situation, and it'll be on a slide, and it'll lay out, what is the company, what is the situation that they're facing, what is the particular problem that had them calling Bain in the first place, and then I usually will lay out the one or two questions that I want you to solve, and I'll actually put those on a slide. And I'll leave that slide on the table throughout the course of our discussion so that you can refer back to it and get some of the critical points of context or factoids that I gave you up front, and also as a reminder of what questions it is we're trying to answer during our conversation.
So where does it go from there?
So let's go back to the four things that I mentioned earlier as I answer that question. The first thing that I'm going to look for is, how did they frame the problem? Do they understand that we're looking to evaluate these two companies, and how are they going to think about the problem in the context of a company that's looking to make an investment? What types of things do they want to know about those two companies? That brings us to driving the conversation. And what I'm looking for there is, can they lay out a couple of options? In this case, I always tell people, because they get nervous when they're doing the case interview, and that's totally understandable. I'll say, what? One option is always to do nothing, make no acquisitions. In this context, though, it might be making one acquisition or maybe even making both. And I'll look for recruits to ask me those types of clarifying questions. Is the appetite there to do one or two investments? The third thing that we'll test is, once we've laid out those options, is those quant skills. And the math, again, isn't very complicated, but I might say, here are the two companies' revenues, here's their share of the market, how big is the overall market? I might say that here are the two companies' revenues, they're each at $75 and $50 million, but they're projected to grow at 15% a year. What's their revenue going to be 2 years from now? Or I might say, here is the profitability of those companies, and what is the profitability of a company that has 50 million in revenue with a 25% margin or a 3% margin. And all I'm looking for there is the ability to do the math relatively painlessly in a way that shows that they're comfortable in an environment that forces them to use math and analytic ability and quant capabilities to get to an answer. And then the last thing I'm looking for is business judgment. And in this context, what I'm looking for is, once they've frame the conversation, once they've driven it down into the 2 or 3 different options that they've laid out, and they've done the math to support that, can they make a recommendation? And when I look at that recommendation, I want it to demonstrate all of the facts and insights that we've collected along the way as you and I have had a conversation about the different situation facing the client.
Presumably they can't get out a calculator and stuff like that. It's all, they have to come up with it in there.
No, it's
the
more
spot,
important that they get it right.
Yeah.
Right? So I don't encourage people to write it down or try and do it in their head. They should do what's comfortable for them, short of using a calculator, of course. I do want to make sure that they can do the basic math themselves. Yeah. But it's not important that you do it super fast or that you do it all in your head and impress me in that way. What's more important to me is that you get it right and that you understand what math you need to do. Then afterwards, when they're done with the quant, then they go back and look at the options. And a lot of times what I'm looking for there is, can they lay out 1, 2, 3 options of how to proceed to answer the questions that are on the table?
How would you recommend that a recruit could actually sort of revise and prepare for this?
I think the best way to prepare, there's several resources online. There's several examples on our website, joinbain.com, in the case prep session that will really help people see different examples of the type of work that we do. A lot of times we will do industry presentations on campus. We have a great series of webinars through Bain Passports or Bain Strategies that give people exposure to the types of work that we're doing. And that gives them a sense of the types of questions we're trying to solve for our clients. And then the other bit of advice that I offer to people is they should always practice live with another person. They shouldn't just try and read the answers or watch videos on the website. They should actually do some of that stuff to prep. But when it comes time to really settling in and getting ready for the case interview process, you should do a live interview and you should practice it live.
So during the interview process, how is you as the interviewer or the team of interviewers, how do you evaluate the recruit? I mean, are you taking notes? Do you have like a set schedule of questions and parameters? How does that work?
That's a fair question. You know, every case interview is going to be unique to the interviewer. We don't have a standard case that we're using in our case interview questions. The interviewers are basing it off their own experience. What's common are the 6 things that we're looking for in the evaluation process. 4 of them we've already talked about. You know, can they frame the problem? Can they do the quant analytics? Can they drive the conversation? And can they come up with a recommendation that exercises great business judgment? The other 2 are a little bit about the dialogue which you raised. One is the client skills. You know, are they asking clarifying questions? Are they taking my coaching and are they coachable? Those are the types of things that give me a sense of how you'd be working on my team with a real client who is going to look at your analysis and ask questions and is going to project their own experience and their own input into your analysis. And I want to see that in real time, you can adapt that into what you're doing and come up with a better answer as a result of us working together.
So in this context, how are you testing for team skills and client skills?
What I'm looking for there is a bunch of different things. You know, from a client skills standpoint, I might look for how you're asking me the questions, and do you have a point of view in mind when you ask those questions? So if I asked you to look at those 2 restaurant targets that we were thinking about earlier, you know, for you to go back and say, well, where are they located? You know, how big are the chains? How successful have they been? How experienced are their management teams? Those are the types of questions that will help you evaluate the concept. Asking me questions about where my headquarters is, or asking me questions about what other investments we've made over time, those really don't have anything to do with how you would answer the 2 questions. And from a client skills standpoint, I'm looking for those because when you're working with clients, you don't want to just ask them to give you all the data they have. Those days are over. They would inundate you with more data than you could ever get through. You have to have a sense of what you're looking for so that when you find it, you know what it is.
Putting myself in the shoes of an interviewer again, how would you be assessing my receptiveness to feedback during the interview process?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's a lot of different ways that I do that as an interviewer. Sometimes people will do the math and they might, just because of nerves, make some simple mistakes in the math. And I might say, that seems really large for a market size. You know, are you sure that that's right? And what I'm doing there is I'm trying to coach you to go back and check your work a little bit and see, you know, can you take that feedback or that question and not get thrown off your game, but can you just buckle down and go back and do what I know you're probably capable of doing in terms of the basic arithmetic. From a client standpoint or a team standpoint, what I'm looking for is people that have the ability to sort of interact and engage with people as they're doing the work. The people that tend to be successful at Bain aren't the people that will go into a room, put their heads down, do the work with the blinders on, and come out with the answer. They'll actually work with the client, they'll work with the team, they'll work with the manager, their partner.
So we've gone through the interview, I've done the maths, we've discussed my thinking and everything. And then at the end, I need to give you my recommendation, my final recommendation as to what we should do. How important is it that I get the right answer?
A lot of recruits ask us that question. There is no right answer on the vast majority of the Bain cases that are out there. A lot of times, because these are drawn from live case examples, they're clients in situations that we've worked on for 6 months or a year, or in some cases multiple years with the same client, tackling the problem from different aspects and different facets in different markets around the world. So a lot of times there's no right answer in a 20, 25-minute discussion for a case interview, but I am looking for a couple of things. One, I'm looking for a methodical approach to how you got to that answer. Two, I'm looking for an answer that's supported by the facts that you developed with your math or your analytics, and also with the facts that I've given you during the case. And three, I'm looking for a really crisp recommendation that's supported by the most important facts that you developed during the case. Overarching all of that is that I want you to understand how you got to that answer in a pretty robust way. Because at the end of that recommendation, I might come back to you and say, okay, well, what if that market wasn't as attractive as we thought? Instead of growing at 10%, does it change your answer if the company was growing at 5%? Does it change your answer if they're a new concept or if the profitability isn't as good as we expected? And what I'm looking for there is, do you understand your analysis well enough so that if important variables change, what else changes downstream? Because in the real world where our clients are doing their work and their business, things change all the time. And the analysis that we did one week might change a few weeks later because a competitor did something, or the regulatory environment changed, or the macroeconomic environment changed. And being able to adapt your analysis to those situations that you didn't plan for becomes really important.
So let's talk about the experience interview. How should recruits bring up their future career goals?
What's important for me when I'm evaluating recruits is thinking about why Bain & Company is the right next step in their career. They may not know what they want to do 10 years from now or even 5 years from now, but hopefully they have enough of a vision to understand what skills they'll need to be successful in whatever career they want to be in. And so what that might mean is coming to Bain to get global exposure to businesses literally around the world. It might mean that they want to get deeper experience and exposure to a certain industry or a certain type of work. It might mean they want to work with different management styles, both on the partner management team, on their case teams, and the client teams, and how all of those different types of experience and different opportunities at Bain & Company come together to support their career vision. That's what's most important to me. What doesn't work as well, I think, is when recruits don't have a really good sense of what it is that we do and what it is that Bain & Company can do for them in their careers and how they would engage with Bain. For example, some recruits will say that they want to do consulting because they like variety. Other recruits will say they want to do consulting because a lot of their classmates seem to be interested in it, or they like to travel a lot. And those might all be true about consulting, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we're the right step for that. So it's important that you understand the difference between what it is consulting is at Bain & Company with all the other career options that are out there.
Okay, Keith, well, thank you. We talked about the case interview. We talked about the experience interview. We've found out more about what Bain is looking for. Well, Keith, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Martin.